tell us about this orange hawkweed. What was so gosh darn inspiring about this weed?
Well, I guess like if I think about more generally the way I work, I love the outdoors, and being a biologist, like I'm always outside either with my kids or doing my own kind of research. So it's just sort of an open way of working of wherever my interests go, I just sort of follow them, right? And so this, I wasn't thinking about it ahead of time, but in like gardening and looking after the yard and stuff, there's one of many weeds. We live out in the country. Is this little? It kind of looks like a little dandelion, but it's this really beautiful color, and it's probably the color that attracts me. Orange is like my favorite, orangey yellow colors, right?
Yeah, I love that color too.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful flower. Anyways, it's like listed as a noxious weed, so you either spray it, which I wouldn't do, of course, because I wouldn't use chemicals in my yard. But so one of my kids usually goes and picks them all and brings me big bouquets. And
okay.
But like, you know, from some of my other work and other artist statements I've given, I often like look at stuff. We have a microscope set up at home, a few microscopes actually, and I like to look at things at a different scale, right? And like a lot of my work is sort of it references or is inspired by looking at things a little bit differently, and often that's like at a microscopic scale. So and I have these like backgrounds in botany as well, so I've done a lot of sitting at a microscope dissecting botanical things, and it's just sort of a natural thing to do. So I started I had some of these and I just started looking at them under the microscope. So it was probably the color first. It was like orange is so beautiful, and then I'd have like bouquets of them everywhere because they're supposed to destroy it on your property. So I'm just surrounded by this beautiful little weed, and then I just started drawing, of course, because that's what artists do. It's just sort of translate that.
Yeah. It's like, boom, okay, I really like this plant. Well, can we just back up a little bit? I want to ask you about, I mean, it is, one of my questions too is about kind of this whole idea of, you know, the noxious weed. Because I know that was also, you know, you were kind of fascinated by that idea. So, and it being considered an invasive species and how there is that interplay too, right?
Yeah, like, so I was working on this body of work for probably most of the summer this year, 2020. Several months anyways. And once I started to get into it and think about what I was doing, yeah, I mean, there's a biology perspective. Like if you look at like invasive species ecology is sort of the reason this species is a noxious weed is because it tends to like spread really easily, and it's not like good eating for cows and pasture. I don't know all the reasons they have it listed. It's not originally from here, right? And it spreads really easily, so they want you to like keep it under control. So I question a lot of that narrative as I was like, why really, like, it doesn't look that spready in my yard, and what's the real problem with this anyways? And I mean, I've worked on invasive species projects as a biologist before, so I know there can be a lot of problems for sure, and you need to, I don't know, do some research and pay attention to what's happening on a larger landscape scale. But to like vilify this beautiful little flower is like, I don't know. And I was also like, this is sort of unrelated, but at the time I was reading a book about like the caged people in the southern US with Trump and all the kids and families and stuff. And I started thinking about the words like alien and applying that to humans. And I'm like, there's nothing really wrong with this flower. Anyways, these are sort of the thoughts that were going through my head as I was learning more on this. And so I was like, I'm just going to look at this as really investigating this beautiful thing. Like, this plant is just thriving, and I love that about nature and plants and animals. Like, whatever we try to do to destroy the landscape, you still see life thriving everywhere, right? And anyways, those are kind of some of the thoughts that were in my head as I was.
Well, fair enough. And I guess because I mean, I do know a little bit about noxious weeds, but like, what are you supposed to do? So you're supposed to like destroy them on your property? Is that what you're saying?
Like a listed noxious weed, yeah. Okay. You have a responsibility to destroy it on your property. So you could just mow over it or pick them. Definitely don't spray chemicals in your yard. It's not good for animals and plants.
Yeah, you know, sure.
Our DNA is like, we have so much DNA in common with like a dandelion, right? So if you're spraying something that's designed to, like, say for mosquitoes, destroy the nervous system of a mosquito, then that's not going to be good for us either.
Gotcha. Well, I agree. I agree. It's like dig them up or do, because I mean, I live, in Calgary. We have the creeping, what is it, the purple bellflower.
It's so beautiful, right?
It is, but it is crazy. Like once it takes hold, it takes hold.
Gardener, I know. It's like horrible as a gardener.
Yeah. But there are still some, like properties in my neighborhood that are like covered with them, and it is really pretty. It's just, and I get it that at a certain point, I think they just have to give up because you just have to like start from square one and like dig it. You'd have to dig it all. You'd have to get, I don't know, some kind of heavy duty equipment in there. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of. I wasn't sure, if like just even picking a bouquet. I mean, that's awesome. Like if you can have a bouquet of these things in your house and control this invasive species that way, I think that's kind of interesting too. I hadn't considered that, right?
Yeah, you need a little 6-year-old helper to pick like 1,000 of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, exactly, right? So, I mean, I guess one other thing I wanted to talk about, I might as well get into this too. I had one of our artists in yesterday who was, I mean, one of the things he said is, it's like, I can't even imagine how physical it must be for her to work on these prints. So it occurred to me, it's like, yeah, I want you to talk about that a little bit, like the carving of them for sure, because there's that aspect, right? Like, are they hand carved or are you using, like electric tools of any type? Or, I mean, it looks to me like they're hand carved for my eye, like just the marks, right? The gouges, those distinct gouge marks.
Yeah.
But again, the scale, and you have to have a lot of physical strength to be, carving away that material. So maybe if you could talk about that a little bit, and then we'll talk about the printing, because that's like the whole other side of it, right?
Sure, I'd love to. I think in the last few years, I've sort of migrated from like printing being my favorite part to the carving being my favorite part. I really love it. It is all I can carve. So you need a bit of strength, but mostly you need nice, sharp tools.
Right.
So a little bit of technique to keeping your tools sharp. But
and I never mastered that. I was like the one that was like, I'd always bend the edge when I was sharpening it. So side note, it's not that easy either. Like you have to have kind of a knowledge of these things. Anyway, go on. So you have the sharp tools.
Yeah, a bunch of tools. It is super physical, and I love that though. So I think that's why I like working big, partly too. Like working on a little something like this, it just doesn't do anything for me. Right. Like I don't know. So like say that big, like that woodcut behind you, say is what, like 5 feet tall or something like that. So that makes like, I'm just ballparking here, maybe like 15, 20 hours of carving, and I just do it. And if I just have an hour here or there, I can just go into my studio and just work on it for a little bit. But yeah, it's all hand carved, and I love it. I love that energetic part of it. I guess that's really.
Well, you can tell, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but you can tell too, like your marks are like happy and joyous, right? Like they're not like you're making, like they're smooth. Like you're not fighting with it at all, which, Bob and I were also talking about, right? Like just how effortless you kind of make some of these marks make. So it shows. Your love shows, Lisa.
I think that's probably just like time spent with the material or a way of working, right? Like I've been doing this for years, so there's that like super comfort level with approaching a big piece of plywood and not worrying about splinters or right. What happens, just like going with what the wood is doing. And anyways, I think that kind of that comfort sort of feel that comes from it is just from lots of practice.
Well, and then on the flip side, so the printing, because I know we spoke a little bit, like even just personally about printing the Meadow, like the 42 by 120 inch print, and just all the technical details of that, like having the paper just like wet, but not too wet. And then, I mean, I know that was a special example, but even just like roll through a little bit of that process, like, cause there's, again, a lot of details, right? Like you're inking up the block. You have to have the Goldilocks of dampness for the paper. Like, tell us a little bit about that too.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So I'm printing all these by hand. Like they're way too big. Even if I had an awesome print press in my basement, which I don't, they're way too big to put on a physical press. So especially the 10-foot one. So it's going to be printed by hand. Anyways, you use a little like baren to like apply pressure and onto the back of the paper when you're printing. Anyway, so let's start at the beginning. I have my big carved piece of plywood. I use a big like rolling pin covered in ink to ink it up. And then you mentioned paper. Like I could talk about each of these subjects for a while.
Hour each, right?
Like printmaking papers, there's so many. I guess the limitation for what I'm working with is having the right dimensions. Like I get paper that comes on big rolls, so they're 100 feet long rolls, but the width is the limiting part. So like the piece you're talking about, that's 42 inches wide, is that it? The widest paper I could find was 43 inches wide. So I gave myself a little bit of margin to work with, which is part of the challenge in printing it. Anyway, so there's paper dimensions is the main thing that I have to try and figure out if I'm working big. I want to be able to print on one sheet of paper, but then there's also, there's so many different materials that papers are made out of, different plant fibers. And these are all like Japanese papers that I'm mostly working with, or like Eastern papers. Not like a heavy cotton rag paper that you might be more familiar with, say for watercolor painting or something, but a lot of relief printmakers and printmakers in general use like these, I would call them like Eastern papers made of fibers from like Japan. I have some that's called like Thai mulberry. They have like really long fibers in them. They're really strong, but they look delicate and they make such a beautiful impression whether you're doing etching or woodblock. It just transfers so beautifully from your plate to the paper if you have a nice paper. So this larger paper that I've been using is not the nicest quality paper, like for as far as this tactility that I'm talking about. It's kind of but it's big enough for me and it's tough enough to be able to print a 10-foot long woodcut. So getting that Goldilocks level of dampness for printing it. Okay, I'm going off on a tangent here. So I also print the paper damp to get a really nice impression from it. And so having a damp piece of tissue paper-like consistency, it's heavier than that, but paper is like a big mess to work with. So so I usually have like a cardboard tube that I roll the paper up on, get it nice and smooth, and like unroll it onto an inked up wood block, and the ink is super, super viscous and sticky, oily ink. So if the paper sits down at all, and you can't move it, once it touches, it's there. So anyway, all these challenges with printing, but it's fun. Once the ink gets on the plate, that's the hard part. Then you're good to go.
And then you take the tool and press it
in. Going over it, you've probably seen people use like a little wooden spoon if they're doing like a line of block or something, right? So you use something a little more technical for printing. You call it a hand bear, and that's sort of like a circle of it puts your pressure over like a little circle of bamboo. And I used my husband Richard a little bit for that 10-foot one. I'm like, I can't go over it again. My muscles are tired. So anyway, that's kind of what it looked like.
Well, no, and that's just it. I just wanted people to understand, like, there's so much work involved in one of these prints, and especially with the scale. It's one thing with the smaller ones that are, 18 by 20, it's like laughing, that's easy to control. But yeah, when you're dealing with prints that are like 42 by 60 or 42 by 120, I mean, it's like just a whole other challenge. But I know that's what you also love about working with it, is like the challenges, right? Is kind of constantly pushing yourself out of a comfort zone, which I think is great, right? Because you are getting some really amazing results out of it. And I guess one other thing I wanted to touch on in regards to that too is the hand printing does, I mean, I get that there is something to be said about, the precision of a press, but I really like that the look of the hand printing too, right? Like you can't really, I brought up an image while we were talking because I realized, hey, people may want to see some visuals. I'm going to bring up some images as we talk here of some of the other pieces. So it's kind of hard to see from these pictures, but there are areas in these prints where they're, really black and inky with the ink, quite literally. And then areas where you start to see a little bit of the wood grain from the plate, or maybe a little bit of a wrinkle in the paper. And I love these things about it because these are made by a human being. These are hand printed, as opposed to, some kind of offset printing where it's, which is fine. I have nothing against that, but there is something beautiful about, the craft intensiveness of what you're doing.
I love how you say that. It took me a while to come to terms with that because printmakers, I think most of us are pretty precise in the way we like to do things. So, and you're taught like very early on, like you need to figure out how to get that black impression, like just to be able to know technique wise, like how to do things a certain way. Mm-hmm. But you're absolutely right, like printing by hand or using like a giant steel press that exerts like, 600 pounds of pressure per like square, whatever. It's a different way of working. That sort of, we call it like saltiness when you get these sort of lighter areas.
Okay, saltiness. Okay.
Like the plywood, part of it's like there's areas of the plywood that are a little bit different in the amount of pressure. Usually each print, I'll probably print it about 4 times before I start to get what I would call like a consistent impression. Like the first ones, any woodcut you put up in the first print, you'll get almost nothing coming on your paper because the wood soaks up a lot of the ink.
Right, of course.
You print a few times and then maybe you start to work on a nicer paper a couple times. And then maybe by the second or third print on a nice paper, you'll start to get what I would say like a consistent proof coming off of it.
Right.
Once I know what I'm going to get, then I kind of go from there. And there might be areas where I'm like, I should probably try and ink up that area like a super extra lot because it's not coming out as good. But you're right. And there's this handmade quality. Just like say, I would compare it to like, say someone in ceramics, like a pottery wheel mug versus a mug made with like little coils that you can.
Right. Okay.
It's a different way of working, right? They have their beautiful qualities, but like something printed not impressed or by hand like this has different qualities. And I like that you can see a lot of wood grain in this. Like older prints that I've done at this scale where I did have access to a giant press, you don't get a lot of wood grain coming through. You get this like really contrasty, beautiful black white printed image. But it's much different. Also on Japanese paper, it's picking up the wood grain. And yeah, anyways, I'm glad that you noticed that.
Well, no, and it's a quality, like I said, that I really love about the prints, because, I guess with everything right now these days, right, like technology kind of turns around and makes it like easier. So, photography, it's the same thing. Like there's all these photographic processes and digital cameras that can, have this crazy resolution. And then, there are the photographers who are like, well, I kind of like the tactility of like working with film, so I think going back to some of these like analog, ways of working is really interesting. And I've always been kind of fascinated about the craft intensive, nature of art making, right? I mean, that's a huge theme that strings together a lot of my artists. And I do very much, love seeing that in the process, the techniques. And I remember when you sent me, the proposal to show at the gallery and just being like, kind of blown away because it was something that I had done on this much smaller level, like you said. And so to see them this way was, anyway, I love them, Lisa. I'm like,
almost 8 years ago now.
It's like a love fest, but it's true, and I do love them, and which is also why I'm like, people come see them in person.
You have to see these. I know, like these giant woodcuts do not translate onto a screen at all, but I'm still glad that we can put it on for people to see.
Exactly, and there are, we're going to be, doing as much as we can. I know I've been retooling the website too to try and create, kind of more interactive, experiences as well, but we'll get the people in here. We will. Okay, what else did I want to? Okay, so we did talk about paper selection a little bit. So, that was the other thing I wanted to talk about. So when we were having our little, Instagram video the other day, if people want to reference this, you mentioned the scale of it kind of being like a microscope slide.
Right.
And I mean, I hadn't even considered that before, but of course, like I know you do use the microscope as a tool, which I guess maybe that's another question I have. So answer whatever order. Maybe you want to talk about your use of the microscope in your practice first, and then segue into that scale. I don't know, but I have questions about the microscope and how that also kind of works into all this.
Can I go the other way? I'm going to start with the other question.
Yeah. It's open. It's open. You answer it in whatever order you want. I'm throwing a whole bunch at you.
There's like the one piece in the show, I don't know if you can bring it up, I called it the meadow, but it's like the big, you call it the big aspirin. We call it the big aspirin when we email it together. You named it.
The meadow is a much nicer name. It's also 42 by 120 inches. So it's worthy of that. Okay, I have all of the images from the show, and that's why I was like, okay, I better start flipping through some of these just so we can, here we go.
So I think I mentioned before, like I want to go as big as I can, but I also like having it all on one sheet of paper. So I have big long rolls of paper. So I knew in my head if I wanted to go really big, I could have something scroll-like, right? Like a big long scroll or a big vertical scroll. But then this is almost exactly the dimension of like a little glass microscope slide. So when I was looking at all these little flower parts or plant bits and stuff, I like have my microscope slide, and I started making little compositions on the slide itself. So I like smear it with some like a bunch of little tweezers and microscope tools. Like place some little like petals and stigmas are these little curly parts, and in a jumbled kind of mess on the slide. It's not like I looked exactly like this, but I was doing a lot of that and then taking lots of photos, reference photos, and I'd go on woodcuts. And anywho, this big kind of scroll, once I had these two big pieces of plywood on my studio set up to start carving and drawing on, I was like, oh, it's just like the same as my little microscope slide. So it's just kind of an extra of what I was doing at the microscopes. But then to answer your other question about like generally using that in my practice, I think I touched on that a bit before. Like I think probably it's because of my background as a botanist, like just having that as a go-to tool for exploring things right outside. And like I know there's so much more that I can see if I look at this on a different scale under the microscope. And I mean, I think a lot of artists look for different ways to like not just have like a super realistic drawing of something they see in the real world, but how can I look at it a bit differently, whether it's like the tools I'm using to execute a drawing, or whether it's like, like me, it's sort of this thing that gets in the way of how I would normally see the world, like looking at it under a microscope is so much different. And then we pull very different pieces. So this is, so these works were also from this year, and they're also like get into this idea of a shift in scale and looking at things microscopically, but they're kind of like a derivative of stuff I did last year, a show in your gallery with these, they're these little like nanostructures called gyroids. And it started with like collecting found dead moth and butterfly wings. But when I started to look into the science of the structures in those wings that allow you to see like the refracted color that you see, into like the mathematics of these little structures inside. And then that led to these like crazy patterns that we're like looking at little models that I made of these structures. Anyways, it's kind of different. I also did these in 2020, but again, it's looking at it. So it's like inspired by real life stuff that I found in nature, but obviously highly abstracted. And that's mostly because of the scale change.
Well, for sure. And I did bring these up because I wondered if they were kind of like a little bit, there, finally the titles come up. I've been clicking the button to show the title for like 2 minutes. But I thought these do seem kind of transitional to me as well, because like you said, they, anyone who, is familiar with your last show here, which is a little over a year ago, you were talking about, like the leaves of butterflies, again, like our leaves, wings of butterflies, and the patterning underneath, of course, abstracted, but again, that's what I kind of love about them. And these two also, just have a really interesting quality to them because they're inside the butterfly, 2 and 3. And they are a little different from the rest of the series, but they're also, yeah, there is a connectedness too. And I guess they also have that shape, right? So, you know, this
kind of.
right, a little bit like that, you know, not as extreme as the meadow. So I did want to ask you about these. So these are kind of, you know, more in line with like, yeah, the Wings of the Butterfly series.
Yeah. Most of that show last year were kind of like the scale of the piece behind you right now, like large scale, very like energetic sort of carving things. But like you said, it's sort of transitional. Moving on from that, I'm like, I don't want to move on too quickly from a subject before I really kind of excavate everything I want to from it. So so I was exploring it just from a slightly different angle for probably like the first few months of 2020. And so there's a lot of this weird stuff. And then it's probably in the summer where I kind of started a totally new body of work, which is what you have in the show, mostly in the show.
It's like, for lack of better terminology, weird stuff. Yeah. Well, and no, but I get it too. It's been a really, you know, and that is, I guess, another question because that I've been asking, you know, all of these live streams, because I've only started them during COVID, is just, you know, being so curious again at like how, you know, the pandemic has like affected your creative practice. Well, all artists' creative practice, right? Because it's been different for everybody, you know, just where they've kind of taken that. So, you know, how did it influence it? Because you started out with these, and then I'm going to hide these again, and we'll bring up some maybe of the smaller prints because you can get a little bit more detail. So where, you know, what happened? Like with the pandemic, you're spending more time at home.
Yeah. So, you know, my practice, the main defining parameter or constraint over the last like 7 years has been like being a parent, a mom. So, and that meant like most of the last 7 years has been me parenting full time and trying to find the time I can to keep my career going at the same time. So it's like full time parent, part time career going on.
Right.
And I was just waiting and waiting and waiting for my kids to get to kindergarten stage, which they finally did. And then COVID came. So I had like this beautiful like 5 months of like my career back. So I was like teaching and had all these things like ready to go for 2020, all these fun things ready to go for 2020 for my career. And then COVID came, so then the kids came home with me again. So I've been full-time parenting again since March. And you know, this is a whole other tangent, like artists and moms, artist moms, and where the lion's share of this childcare during the pandemic is landing mommies. And even before the pandemic, you know, as an artist, I have twins. Like, there's no way that my income could have paid for childcare for twins. So a lot of artist moms are like doing this sort of balance of really wanting to keep your career going full steam, but not really having an option but to also do the full-time parenting. Anyways, that's a little tangent, but so that's the main thing that I think of with COVID is like, okay, I got my kids home again, so work is now evenings and weekends, so it's
right. So it's all had to shift again.
Yeah. And then I mean, Richard was home working, my husband, for a good part of it, like when he has to work at home, which is now again. So we try to like split up the daytimes a little bit, make sure he gets his full work hours in, but maybe once in a while I get a few daytime hours. Like right now.
Exactly. For our day interview, which is why I'm like drinking tea and not wine, everybody. But you know, it's a little early for the wine.
I'd say that's the main impact, is having like the lion's share of childcare being on my shoulders again. And then as far as the work itself, I mean, when the pandemic first started in our part of the world, there were probably like a few weeks where I was like, I'm not doing anything in the studio, like it's not at all. But that just went away quick enough. And I don't usually ever have dry spells where I'm not working. I always have ideas, way more ideas than there is time for me to pursue. So,
well, it seems like this body of work kind of like came or seemed to happen really fast, even though you had the kids at home, right? Because, we had the show like, like a little over a year ago, the last show. So it was, of course I was excited to have another show for you so quickly, but, not expecting it either. Right. And,
I think one of the other silver linings, there's many silver linings of parenthood. Yeah. I'm saying silver linings. There's all sorts of great things about parenthood, but one is like really making the most of your time. Like, so when you do get into the studio, there's no, like, if you had 8 hours every day to sit in the studio, you'd be like, like on Instagram or doing whatever. Yeah. But like, if I have a couple hours in the evening, then I want to get, like, I have these ideas, these things I want to do. So I just get right to work. So I guess it's like just making the most of those hours.
Right. Yeah, it's like the quality hours as opposed to the quantity of hours, which I get, because you probably have a lot of time during the day to decide exactly what's going to happen in those like 2 or 3 hours, right?
Yeah, I think I've heard this from a lot of people, but definitely shower time, like when I'm in the shower, there's like so much good thinking time that happens in there. I don't know what it is.
It's like it creates that perfect, like, liminal state for your mind, like, and we all have our own places.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure a lot of people have that in the shower too, right? Because again, if you're a parent, I don't have kids, I have dogs, but I know for a lot of parents, it's like being in the shower is like their sacred place, right? Like, because it's like the kids are not there. It's like warm, water, steam. Like,
it's the same with dogs. If you open the bathroom door, they're all like sitting there waiting for you.
Like, where have you been? We missed you. Yeah, it's true. It's true. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to ask you. Okay. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you, and I know this is a silly question. It's kind of like, who's your favorite kid? But did you have like a favorite print from this series that you enjoyed working on?
Yeah. Can you guess which one?
Is it the meadow?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it made sense, but I know it was also a lot of challenges, right? So it's like, who knows? I'll leave it open.
I really love working big, like big, and sometimes on Instagram I see like, these artists, I don't know where they get their money and studio space from, with these huge and giant canvases. I'm like, oh, it looks so nice. And then sometimes they have just these awful paintings. I'm like, what a waste of that giant paper. What are you doing? I'm not normally that judgmental, but
no, we've all had those thoughts. It's like, maybe you don't deserve that kick-ass studio. Fair enough.
But I felt so good just working big, and I was like, I'm just going to do another huge one after this, and which I will. I'll do some more really big work, but felt so comfortable and nice. Just there's no restrictions. I'm like, I'm just going to carve this over here, and I just knew, like, there's no, like I said to you, and like the other recording we did at the meadow, like I like not worrying about the final product and pushing myself and taking risks, and that it usually shows in the work, right? It doesn't feel constrained. It's just yeah. Absolutely. So that was my favorite one because it was probably my favorite way of working, but I really like the imagery that turned out from it too.
Well, so are you going to do more like that? Or I guess obviously you've opened that door, right? So that the next show is going to be, I'm guessing, will we even have little prints anymore? It's like, this will be the new small, everybody. This will be like Lisa's mini print that is 60 by 42.
Yeah, and if anyone watches this and has tips for accessing paper that's wider than, actually, I found a new roll of paper that's 54 inches wide.
Oh.
That's great. If anyone knows of any wider rolls than 54 inches.
Put it out to the community if anyone knows wider rolls.
I don't know if they're at 54 is pretty wide. So that's great though. I can go a little wider, and I have some new plywood ready to go and cut at that slightly wider scale. It's just they're really awful to print. The printing part, the carving and everything, I just love. So I'll get a helper to help me when it comes to printing.
Well, I would love to help you with the print. I know I'm far away, but it's like, maybe when this is like kind of like we're back to semi-normal and we can be in the, I'd come down for a day and print with you. It's like,
well, you know what? If I rented a truck, I could bring stuff to the gallery and we could have it all on the floor and do like a big printing thing.
That would be
But
fun.
it's not floor because it's so big, so we just need floor space.
Yeah, exactly. And I have lots of that. Yeah, that would be really fun. Well, and this is a side tangent too, but I was like digging through the drawers the other day to bring out the smaller prints that you sent in March to put up. You know, because for like I said earlier, kind of like for gifts, like good ideas for people for gifts, or if they want to treat themselves, which is what most of us do at this time of year, right? But then I found some of your copper plates, like that from when it. So I was like, I didn't even know I had these.
So I don't know what those would be either. What do they look like?
Well, they're from like that the first prints that we ever had of yours. Anyway, I digress. I will send you images because I'm like, I don't even know I had these, but unless they were like tucked in a folder at some point of some work you sent. But anyway, if you wanted them back, you're welcome to have them.
I must have brought them just so you could show like people in the gallery.
Well, and that's what I've done. I mean, I know you're working on wood blocks now, but I actually took them out because they do kind of relate to, you know, the etchings, right? So I brought those. And I think they're just interesting, again, for people to kind of see the process. I was asked, again, by somebody if, you know, if I had any like images of you. Well, I think I did have some images of you kind of working on the prints, but we might have to have like, you know, you might have to have like your husband shoot a little action shot, like a little video of you.
I have some.
Yeah, perfect. Because I'd love to post that too. Because again, there is this whole like, you know, there is the physicality of it, and it is a little mysterious because you are. I mean, I think a lot of people know, but you're also working in reverse. So you're carving away, obviously, all the areas that are in white. So you have to kind of think a different way as to how you want that image to be. You know, you're thinking in reverse. Yeah. And I've kind of, I just went on a tangent there too. But okay, let's talk about these little prints for a little while because we talked about, I brought up two of them here because there are some, these are the smallest ones as part of the newer body of work, and they are 18 by 20. Yeah. So you can see a lot more detail in them. Yeah, they're so playful too. And I really like that about them as well. Like they are really, really playful, like these curly cues.
I think I did these. There's like 6 of them, right? I think after I did the big ass giant print, the meta one, then I went like way down in size because I still had all this imagery that I wanted to get out of me quickly, and I was like, I could do a bunch of little prints like super fast, no problem, just like playing with some of this imagery. So yeah, I kind of whipped those out really fast, and they were fun.
Like really fast, like just out of curiosity.
Okay, so yeah, like take that with a grain of salt. For fast for woodcut printmaking. So what? I would probably carve one in maybe like 2 evenings, like a couple hours each evening to carve one, and then like a few hours in a printmaking session to print one. So a few hours. What would it like 5-6 hours total to get a proof of one of those? But I had a lot of imagery. I mean, not to like shortchange the whole like research drawing part that leads up to that point, right? Like there's a lot of time that went into it to get to that point to have all this stuff. I just wanted to get down on a woodcut and start carving and print. I mentioned in the other video you shot like a little bit more about what some of the structures and like forms and stuff are in here. So maybe I'll talk
about that. Yes.
So the little curly things are, I mean, all super abstracted, but I was looking under the microscope. So those were like little stigmas at the top of these hawkleaf flowers. So I mentioned to you before, like if you look at a dandelion close up, there's all these little curly things on the top of it, and it's like an inflorescence, actually, a bunch of flowers all together in one head. It's what a dandelion or a hawkleaf flower head is. So those are there's a whole bunch of those little things, and I just thought they were so cool. And when I squish them under a slide on a microscope, like these spirally cords, and anyways, it's just kind of a neat form. And then these sort of hand-like, it's a modified petal called like a ligule or a ray flower on the outside. So like a dandelion, it only has those. If you look at it close up around the outside of the inflorescence, it's not on the inside. Or individual flowers have like one of those each, and Same for this pretty beautiful little orange hawkweed invasive species that I love. So I'd like pluck off the little petals, and I mean, it's kind of, yeah, I mean, I totally destroy the flower when I'm dissecting it, but it's for a
You're a noxious weed and you've got lots of them, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's funny, like, you know, that I work almost exclusively with black ink only, so like you get these black and white images out of it. So I'm really focused on the form, even though the thing that I love most about this plant is its amazing color. If you ever see it next summer, you'll all have to keep an eye out for it, right?
Yes.
There's a number of native hawkweed species, and they're all yellow. But this one, if you see an orange one that looks like an orange dandelion, kind of only smaller with hairy stems. Anyway, so that's orange hawkweed.
Well, I had to look it up because I was curious, right? Yeah. And yeah, no, it is really pretty. Like it's like a delicate version of a dandelion, right? Because they're like much smaller.
Yeah, but the color, like whenever I see orange, I just get so excited. I don't know what it is. People have their favorite colors, right?
Oh no, I love orange as well. Like oranges and yellows, I really.
Yeah, they're mine too. Cool.
I can't wear them, you know, because it's like not a flattering color on me. But I love them in everything. Like I love them in art. I love them in nature.
Or like a house, I love yellow houses. Anyways, so these ones, yeah, I had a bunch of photos from looking under the microscope. So I have like a camera I can mount to my microscope and take photos of what I. So I have, 100,000 images on my computer, all of the microscope sessions over the last few years. So there's so much imagery to work with. I mentioned also, I mean, not that this matters, but there's also some little leaves from mosses that I referenced in here, like this the structure that looks like kind of like a vase on the side of one of those with little, it's like a cone shape on with little marks in it. Which are like a super fascinating group of plants in and of themselves, but they just ended up on some of my microscope slides. So I just having fun and playing with the forms. It's a total playful approach. It doesn't look necessarily playful as like a big abstract black and white alien looking thing, but the way that I approach it is very playful.
We looked at this one. Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to roll through these. These I think are two that I hadn't. No, I really like the structure because they're like the curlicues or like the hand shapes. They're the vase shape. There's these ones that kind of have like in floret, like there is like almost like wings. They each have like a little kind of like magical, fun quality to them. I mean, they are abstracted, but I love that they also are kind of reference something.
I think they feel a bit botanical still, which is interesting. Like, it's not like I'm trying to make botanical art necessarily, but anyways. And then the marks, apart from like the sort of forms, there's like the mark making itself. Like, so I use a bunch of different, I probably have like, for any given woodcut, like one of these, I probably have maybe 6 or 7 different tools with different shapes, like V-gouges, and I'd like switch between. So if I know that I want something to be really like a really dramatic contrast or something, say like around the top of one of those where there's like black and white, really dramatic, I'd use like a bigger tool to really scrape away some of the carve more deeply or broadly into the wood, and I want more subtle variation in tone. If I want to achieve like a tonal gradient, like not just black and white, but have a little bit of there, then I'll often use a smaller tool to kind of get some shading. Do you know what I mean? Like a mimic. It's like a mimicking of shading. It's not actual shading, but you get the feel of tone when you stand back from it.
Well, and I hadn't really thought about that, but it's true. I think we have one print, again, from one of the first shows that is in color. Like it's yellow and blue.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
And I like it, but it's like when it's a thing, because when I show it to people, they're like, same art. And it's like, yes, it's
it's always like in my head, like in my mental agenda to do some more color experimenting. Like always. It's not like I don't like it. It's just I have so many things that I want to try and get to, and I just gotta limit what I'm working with.
Well, and they don't lack for it. You know what I mean? Like they are, I love them as the black and white. Like certainly could they have, yes, but I mean, there is something, I love the graphic quality of them with the black and white. And there's something, yeah, really enticing to me at least, about it kind of being, you know, just the elements. You're not, you know, the color when not used properly can also be a deterrent, right? And I think, you know, it's working for you, not against you. Let's put it that way. I really do like the black and white. And that, you know, like I said, that graphic quality, I kind of sound like a broken record, but yeah, there is something just, yeah, so beautiful about it, like the intensity of them, the boldness of them. And yeah, so you're allowed to play. I'm not saying you can't play, but I also do really like them as these black and whites. The poor yellow and blue print is here if you want to see it, everyone. Like we're happy to show it to you.
It's not my favorite, but okay.
Oh, like no judgment. It is like an older print, but that's still, you know, still a very unique body of work. So I'm just going to put it out there. And we're pretty much like at almost an hour.
Okay.
Right? Isn't that crazy? It goes by fast when you're having a great conversation. So,
thanks for taking an interest. It's nice to be able to talk about it.
Well, I know, and we are going to figure out a way to maybe do like a tour of the show. That is like my next technical challenge, is to figure out how you and I can kind of virtually walk around the gallery with the show. Or one or both, like we'll figure it out, but that's my next challenge, because I think those are also fun too. I've done a couple of them with artists.
I like those ones, yeah.
Yeah, and they're, you know, because then we can kind of address all the individual pieces a little bit more in person, whereas this is more of like this is what you're thinking about, like have a little bit of like a conversation. So what else do I want to say? I want to thank everyone again for whoever has kind of watched this or part of this. We know an hour is a long time, but at the same time, if, you know, we're happy that you were able to kind of tune in and hopefully have a few laughs with us and find out a little bit more about Lisa's work and the show that we have on now at the gallery. It is up until January 23rd. We are taking, I guess it's a little over a week break for the holidays. Our hours will be on our website, and we are happy to book, you know, a private viewing for you on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, or we are open to the public on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays from 11 to 4. This is one thing I wanted to mention too. So I kind of touched on this, but the prices for this work range from, you know, the really small ones that I don't have images of. Those ones range from kind of like $175 to I think $550. But then the ones in this show range, they kind of start at $1,000 and up. So, you know, and we don't have any of them framed, unfortunately, because it was, well, framing's such a personal thing too. So certainly if you'd like to see some framed examples, our master framer Candace would love to talk to you about that. You know, I'm going to do a little plug for her here too, because like we frame anything and everything, and Candace would love to talk to you about that as well. Amazing. All the art is available for purchase. All of it.
So talented.
What's that?
Candace is so talented. Her framing is just amazing. And the prints in particular, like she has so many great ideas for how to present the work.
Well, it's true. And we do have one from your last show up in the gallery in a frame to kind of give people an idea. I think it's a good kind of visual of, you know, how we can mount them. There's so many ways that you can, but yeah, so that's like a whole other world, but I'll direct you to Candace for that, because it's not my forte. And yeah, all the art is available for purchase. You can see the entire body of work on our website, because we're always open at christineclassengallery.com. Thanks again, Lisa. This has been an awesome hour chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Christine. Thanks, everybody.